My name is Dana Magliola. I'm the Freight and Logistics Program Manager at NCDOT and work pretty regularly with the folks, the talented folks over at ITRI. And I'm excited to introduce the first of what I believe will be many webinars for them. This one specifically focused on the web tool to identify important bridges with weight restrictions. This tool, developed by Chase Nichols and his colleagues at NC State's Institute for Transportation Research and Education, is just the latest in a series of resources developed by ITRI for transportation, supply chain, and planning professionals. The tool does an outstanding job of connecting infrastructure with the economic context that it both serves and that infrastructure facilitates. There's so many potential uses for this tool, and we've already found it pretty helpful for planning efforts around a comprehensive transportation plan, doing some investigation on industrial density in certain areas. So there's all kinds of applications, and I think as you get to know it today, you may find some of your own. I'd like to introduce our presenter today is Chase Nichols. Chase earned his Master's of Geospatial Information Science and Technology from North Carolina State University, go Pack, and he holds a Master's of City and Regional Planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. A great planning group over there, but we're glad that he's righted the ship and is wearing red these days. He started out as an Indiana Hoosier and has found his way down to North Carolina, where I hope he'll stay with us. Chase currently serves as the Geospatial Research Analyst at NC State's History Group, and his skills and experience in planning and GIS uniquely equip him to bring this perspective to bear on problems in urban and regional issues like land use, transportation, economics, and policy. So without further ado, I'll turn over the microphone and desktop here to Chase. Spend some time and tell us what you got. Thanks, Chase.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you for the great intro. Hope everyone can hear me okay. Good morning to everyone who's joined us today. Thanks for joining us. And just to give you kind of a brief summary of what we'll hope to be covering today. Before we jump into a live demo of this web application, I'm just going to give some quick background on the research effort that it came out of, RP 2020-20 for NCDOT, titled Identifying Bridges Critical to North Carolina Agriculture and Commerce. And then I'll do a live demo of the web application, and we'll have plenty of time, I think, for some Q&A and discussion as well. And we'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts about the application. So just to give you a little bit of background about where this application comes from. In early 2021, our research team here at NC State, that included not just myself, but also Thomas Dudley, Steve Burt, Nick Norwich, George List, and Daniel Findley, completed this research project for NCDOT titled Identifying Bridges Critical to North Carolina Agriculture and Commerce. And our objective there was to identify the weight-restricted bridges throughout the state that are critical to the agriculture and commerce freight network. And this is important because these bridges do not qualify for their own set of funding on the basis of those weight restrictions alone. So improvements to weight-restricted bridges on the basis of those weight restrictions are ad hoc, and there's needed to be a way to prioritize that funding when it becomes available. Recently, we also submitted our research product to the Institute for International Journal of Transportation Science and Technology, and they've accepted it for publication. Just to show you here on the right, we have the locations of weight-restricted bridges throughout the state. We have about 2,900 weight-restricted structures, and these are just any bridges that are posted with a maximum vehicle or tractor-trailer weight restriction. So a bridge that a truck cannot cross if it's over 8, 12, or 16 tons. As you can see, we have a bit higher concentration of those bridges in the western part of the state due to the topography in that area. But we also have weight-restricted structures spread throughout the state. Our method in this research used network analysis in ArcGIS to model probable routes from businesses that were trucking dependent to the freight network. So we adopted kind of a probabilistic approach for this project, which I think will be demonstrated in the web app. But ultimately, since we didn't know the ideal routes that trucking-dependent businesses would use to reach their destinations, we modeled 4 routes for each business in our study, 1 north, 1 south, 1 east, 1 west, to get some different unique vectors that freight might be traveling from these locations. These routes were designed to reflect realistic trucking decisions and find the shortest distances to the highway network. And we were able to use those routes to identify the bridges that businesses would ideally take to the freight network, whether or not those paths contained weight-restricted bridges. So it's just a simple model of this methodology on the right. Again, we're modeling travel in many directions, and we're most interested in what happens immediately on the local roads proximate to these businesses, where freight is likely to encounter weight restrictions. In this project, we were able to score 158 bridges that were traversed by business locations. So down from that 2,900 to a really manageable number that we think are likely impacted by weight-restricted bridges. And we were able to give them a score that reflects not only their likelihood to use a bridge, but also the trucking intensity of that business, and also the detour that's required to circumvent that bridge. So there's a lot that's built into this score, not only traversing a bridge, but also some other factors. And here is our final map of scored weight-restricted bridges throughout the state. And this is on the basis of business locations, as I mentioned, and those business locations come from ArcGIS Business Analyst. We did notice in our research that agricultural sources of freight were not that well represented in the traditional business listings. So in an extension to this project I worked on for my capstone research in the Center for Geospatial Analytics Master's Program at NC State, I developed this extension to identify point sources of crop freight throughout the state, major sources of the most important crops in the state, and use those point sources to model bridge traversals. So really trying to focus on freight that's moving, trucks that are moving crop freight throughout the state. This is built off the USDA cropland data layer, which is a public data resource I'll show in just a minute. And we had many more bridges identified as being critical in some form or another in this research extension. And we also were able to improve identification of bridges that were considered critical to division bridge officials. However, we'd still like to extend this research with livestock data. So we have the kind of first part of the research, which is business focused. So where are trucks traveling from those businesses that are freight dependent? And then we have this kind of extension that's more agricultural crop source focused. And both of these parts of the research are reflected in the web app. So from this research, we developed the web app, which I'll demonstrate in just a moment. It is a public tool. It was developed using ArcGIS Web App Builder, using our results and demonstrating the methods from the research. In the web app, as you'll see in a moment, you'll be able to browse the results of the study. You'll be able to browse and filter all weight-restricted bridges in North Carolina. A user can also choose any point location in North Carolina and identify weight-restricted bridges that are likely to impact access to that location. And then finally, users can also kind of do the second part of that research and identify point sources of crop freight based on the USDA cropland data layer. So there's a lot of functionality in this web app. We also have a pretty comprehensive video walkthrough and user guide that are linked from the web app, which I'll show in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and hop over to my browser now, where I have the web application pulled up. Can we see the splash screen here? Okay, great. So the first thing a user will encounter when they open the web app is this splash screen, which introduces the web application and also has a link to the video walkthrough and the user guide. So both of those are helpful in understanding how to use this web application. I'll show those in a moment. If you don't want to see the splash screen the next time you pull this up, just click that button there. But for now, I'm just going to click OK. So the first thing you'll see when you open the web application is the results of our study that we submitted to NCDOT. So these are the bridges that are scored as being critical to some degree throughout the state of North Carolina. On the bottom ribbon, you'll see tools for interacting with the map, the first of which is just an information tool. This gives a brief summary of the application, what it's used for, some comments that I just covered in the introduction slides, as well as instructions for using the two main custom tools that are on this web application. So you can always return to this information screen if you'd like a link to the video walkthrough or to the user guide. So the user guide is just a PDF that summarizes accessing the application, basic operation, the feature layers that are browsable, the custom services that we built into the application, and how to run those tools. If you'd like to check out the video walkthrough, you'll pull up a YouTube link that kind of goes step by step through each of the tools on the bottom ribbon, as I'm going to in just a moment. So we'll send out at the end of the webinar a link to this YouTube video together with the recording from today's presentation. So again, if you ever need to get back to those, you can find them here in the information section, as well as a link to the final report that we submitted to NCDOT, which has a lot more detail on the methods that were used to develop this research. Also on the bottom ribbon here, we have a variety of base maps you can select from if you'd like to change the visualization of the map. You'll find a legend where there are entries for features that are currently displayed on the map. So here we can see the range of scores for these weight restricted bridges. These are scores that range from 0 to about 300 or so. So quite a wide range there. If we open the layer list, you'll find that you can toggle on and off a variety of layers. If we want to see the model results that are based on the agricultural sources extension, we can toggle those on, and the legend will change to represent that layer. Or we can toggle on just all weight restricted bridges throughout the state. If you would like to download the results of the research, you can do it from the layer list as well by opening up the attribute table for any of these layers. And from the attribute table, you can easily export the data to a CSV and save that locally if you'd like to have the tabular data. Down here in the attribute table, you'll also see attributes that are related to the layer you have open. So you can see the scores for each of the bridges and also the rank in our model. So if you'd like to see the most important bridges, you can easily sort by rank and then double click to kind of zoom in on there, and you'll be taken to that bridge. Also keep in mind that this attribute table will filter by the view extent unless you turn that setting off. So I already mentioned that you can look at the original results of the study and download that data. You can also look at the ag extension results and download that data. And then you can look at the weight restricted bridges themselves. But we've also built in a couple really cool custom tools to this web app. I mentioned that the web app allows users to identify the dependence of any point in North Carolina on weight restricted bridges. And that can be done using the Identify Weight Restricted Bridge Traversals tool. So what this tool does is actually replicate that method from the research where we modeled 4 routes from each business and looked at the weight restricted bridges that might impact the routes in any direction. So you might be interested in a point in North Carolina that could be impacted by weight restricted bridges. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and pull open a location here outside of this town of Grantham, North Carolina. And again, you can change the base map gallery if you're more used to seeing a kind of Google Maps type of interface. But I like to use the dark because I like the contrast, it's easy to see. And when you decide on a point that you'd like to assess for weight restricted bridge dependence, you can click on the origin point here and place it wherever you'd like to. And I'm going to place this marker down near this road intersection here. So maybe we have a site that we want to use for economic development, but we don't know how it's going to be impacted by weight restricted bridges. We know that we've got a few in the area, but we don't know necessarily which routes that business is going to be most likely to take for its shipping processes. So once you've selected your location, all you need to do is click run. And right now, this tool is taking a minute or so to run. It's conducting a lot of network analysis in the background and finding 4 routes to the highway network that are ideal for this business. So if you're patient, it will load eventually these 4 routes. And as you can see, it's created 1 route north, 1 south, 1 east, and 1 west for this business to get that multi-directional pattern. And any weight restricted bridges that are traversed in the process pop up as red targets in this result. So you can see that this business is likely to be impacted by weight restricted bridges when shipping to the east. So the most efficient route it finds down to Wilmington and onto 40 in that direction goes across these 2 weight restricted bridges here before that route reaches Dudley and then goes south to 40. There are 2 new layers that are added to the map when this process solves. The first is the traversed weight restricted bridges, and the second is the route. So if you find a location that is impacted by weight restricted bridges and you'd like to keep a record of those bridges, you can easily export that result to CSV file. You can open the attribute table to find those traversed weight restricted bridges. And we'll make sure that we have the results open only. And from there, you can also export the results. I think I have too many tabs open right now. So again, you can use that tool for anywhere in North Carolina. You can clear the results, clear the input, and run it again as often as you like. If you ever encounter an issue with the network analysis failing to solve, you could just refresh the entire application and then rerun the tool in a fresh instance of the application. The last tool I'd like to show you is this Develop Crop Point Sources tool. And this is the one that uses the USDA cropland data layer to develop crop point sources for freight in North Carolina. We have the USDA cropland data layer, which has been filtered for major sources of crop freight. And if you pull that open, you will see those major sources of crop freight in North Carolina. Again, these are kind of essentially the first part in the supply chain for agricultural products. So this is trucks at the field level. If you open the legend, you can see the various crop types that are reflected in this layer. And if you zoom in, you can actually identify these crop types in any part of the state. Again, this layer is developed by the USDA. It's remotely sensed. So we have crop types that have been identified by satellite imagery. If you're interested in what they are, you can easily click on the map to determine the crop type. So then we have the Develop Crop Point Sources tool, and this demonstrates how we were able to identify where crop sources of freight might be located throughout the state. So using this tool, you can select any county in the state. You can select one of the major crop types that we filtered for. You can select the minimum acreage for a point source. So this determines how big or small we want to allow a point source of crop freight to be. The default right now is 50 acres. And the average truck trip load, so how much weight is added to the truck in terms of crop freight, and also the average truck trip length. So these are really only important for calculating the intensity level of crop freight that's coming from a source. These others will help you identify the point sources themselves. If you'd like to find more information about how these factors impact calculations of the trucking intensity for any of these sources, just check out the user guide and the research paper. So I'm going to go ahead and develop some crop point sources for Duplin County. And I'm going to change the crop type to soybeans. Maybe that's what I'm interested in right now. And I'm going to change the minimum acreage to 100 acres and leave the other items on the default. When I click run, this is going to start chugging away, developing those point sources. This tool runs a little bit faster, so we might be able to see it in real time here. At least, if not, I'll go ahead and pull open the, oh, here we go. So it's going to come up with two layers. The first is going to be these point sources of freight. That's going to be the blue dots here. And then it also has aggregation thesins, which is used in our model to kind of combine all of the extra sources of soybeans within the vicinity of this major field so that we don't lose any of the overall freight from an area that needs to be sent. And this is how we develop sources to be used in our model for determining how the weight-restricted bridges affect point sources of crop freight. If you go in and I have the model open here, here's 100-acre sources. If you were to change to 200-acre sources, you would simply get fewer point sources. However, all of that soybean freight is still going to be consolidated to these major areas in the vicinity of these large fields. So if I was to zoom in on one of these dots, I'll see a very large soybean field in the cropland data layer. It should be dark green when it shows up. So here's one of those major sources of soybeans freight. So that is the second of the custom tools that we've added to this map. Again, if you'd like to turn off any of those layers, you can do so. They'll appear in the layer list. You can just go back in and turn those off once you've created them. So one of the last tools I'd like to show you is just a way to browse some of these weight-restricted structures that we have in North Carolina. I know some folks are just interested in identifying where these structures are, maybe in their district or along their critical freight routes. So to do that, you can simply use this filter tool on the bottom ribbon here. And that allows you to set maximum single vehicle weight restrictions. So perhaps we're only interested in weight restricted bridges with a maximum restriction of 10 tons for a single vehicle. You can just add that filter and turn it on, and we'll instantly have all of the bridges in the state that are weight restricted to 10 tons for single vehicles. And the same logic applies for tractor trailer vehicles. So if we're only interested in bridges that permit tractor trailers under 15 tons, we can set that parameter, toggle on the filter, and we'll have our bridges represented there. There's also an opportunity here to use a custom filter. So maybe we're only interested in bridges with a maximum tractor trailer tonnage of 15 tons that are in Buncombe County. So we can go ahead and turn on our filter here. And then I'm going to add a second custom filter to the weight restricted bridges layer. And I'm going to filter for bridges that are in county. Switch to unique values here so I get a list. And change the county to Buncombe. So now I just have those weight restricted bridges in Buncombe County restricted to a level of 15 tons for tractor trailers. And if I want to export those results, I can go back up to my layer list here for weight restricted bridges and open the attribute table. And I'll have my filtered list of bridges in Buncombe County. We've also added an option to print results on this web app. So you can just open the print tool here, set the features on the map in the way that you'd like to be represented in print format, and hit print, and that will prepare a PDF for you for print. So I think I've covered all of the functionality that's in the web app. Of course, if you'd like to consult the user guide or the walkthrough video, you always can to kind of refresh how those tools work. At this point, I think we can open it up for any questions we might have about the tool, how to use it, or any other questions about the research project or the methodology that this tool comes out of. I don't know if anybody has any questions right now. Feel free to put those in the chat or to raise your hand, and we'll try to address each one.
I guess I'll talk. This is Kendall Jackson with the Highway Patrol. I talked to Chase about this the other day. We looked at it, and it's very neat. One of the big problems or arguments, I guess, I don't want to call it a problem, arguments I get from industry is a posted bridge by law is literally posted at the bridge. So typically the trucking company would have to know that bridge existed before getting on the road. In contrast to that, a light traffic road is posted at the end of the road, and then anywhere and it crosses in between before you get onto that road, there's typically a sign to say, hey, this is a light traffic road. So when a company does get to that bridge, at that point, normally there's just no way to turn around. They have to cross. So they have to know prior to getting on that road that there was a low posted or a low bridge there that they couldn't cross. So I think it'd be a huge benefit. I don't know who really is in charge of DOT as far as making the decisions to what goes on your website, to what people have access to help them navigate. I know if you do go on there, there's maps, but they're not interactive like this. They're just literally like a map, and you have to kind of figure it out yourself. But the other side of it, and that's kind of why I asked Ben Hennett to come on. He's with the permit office, where he can tell you what he does. But I know they look at more than just the posted bridge for industry. They look at and I think the biggest factor for industry crossing our state is low bridges, and then also a low tonnage road with that. So I guess the other question one, I know this doesn't factor those. A low bridge doesn't factor a low tonnage road. And then the other question I had is, does it, and I assume not, account for or kind of show that what cities do? We get arguments a lot from people within cities that have a sign in their front yard that says, a truck can't go through here, but they don't understand that's a city ordinance, and there's nothing we in the Highway Patrol can enforce on that. So they get angry with us that we can't come enforce that sign. So I'm going to assume that this doesn't account for any city ordinances or regulations. It's simply the state law, state posted bridges.
Oh, thanks for that. Those thoughts, Kendall. Those are we discussed those, like you said, the other day. I think they're all great points, which is that if we have a weight restriction somewhere on the network, or a clearance restriction, which I think we'd love to incorporate into this process, it's not necessarily helping anyone to just identify that issue at the once you've already gone down a section of road and then need to turn around. So I definitely think there's space to kind of work on identifying those sections of road that are likely to be impacted by some sort of restriction, whether it's weight or clearance, where there is no other outlet. So you can kind of see where those locations are, where if you know your load's going to be higher than some threshold, here are the actual sections of the roadway that you're going to need to avoid rather than simply point locations. Make a lot of good points there. I'm gonna invite Daniel Finley to speak as well if he'd like to. He was the PI on the research project that kind of created this application came out of. Daniel, if you'd like to speak to any of those points, I'll go ahead and invite you to clearance restrictions, local ordinances, in addition to just it's kind of statewide weight restrictions, any of those topics that were brought up.
Yeah, thanks, Chase and to Kendall for the question. I think it's a really fitting subject, and the comments really illustrate that often we start with something that's just scratching the surface, particularly as you think about the other use cases. And I don't think we had all of your particular use cases in mind when we started this research. And we started with a fairly narrow scope, and now we're kind of exploring expansions of that. So as you mentioned, we didn't cover local ordinances in our study unless they were also added into the NCDOT data layer there. So that's not in there. But you're exactly right. And Chase and I have had this discussion also, is, this only started with weight restricted bridges, but looking more holistically about, lower weight pavements, clearances in terms of structures above the road or another thing. So yeah, you may fix, for instance, if you fix a weight restricted bridge, but half a mile down the road, there's a low clearance of 10, 11, 12 feet or something, that isn't going to help the trucking industry in a lot of cases, probably. So we do have thoughts that we could expand this where it is a more holistic tool for freight companies, trucking companies to use to identify those potential locations and routes that may be problematic. And look forward to the continued discussion on ways we can supplement the data we have. If you know of some of these additional layers that we can add into the map, it's fairly straightforward. If it's a more manual process, it's also possible. And if there's some locations that have these ordinances geolocated, certainly something that could be added as a layer into these maps. So look forward to the potential partnership on this to continue to improve the usability of the map.
Hey, Chase and Daniel, this is Ben Hennep with NCDOT Oversized Overweight. There are currently layers. We have been in development of a new routing tool for the last few years, and we currently have every vertical clearance throughout our state. When it comes to what you guys are creating for normal freight, legal height is 13 foot 6 inches. Currently, there's only a few bridges in our state that remain less than legal. Anything greater than that would need to go through my office anyway, and therefore all structures would be checked. Currently, with this particular application, how often are you guys getting data updates from structure management from DOT?
So I can speak to that. I think that kind of weaves into another question that's been posed in the chat, which is how is this research kind of translating into actions, changes, improvements from Danielle? So currently, we've only completed this research one time for NCDOT, but I am working directly with NCDOT on implementing the model that we developed in-house, so that it can be rerun with subsequent updated data sets. So by the time we finish this research over the course of the year, I think there were at least a couple bridges that were slated for replacement. That was something we worked on identifying in the process, and we know that we're going to have updated structure information all the time, as well as just simply updated kind of road network information that impacts how these bridges are used. So actually, as part of this research, we developed a set of modules. They're Python scripted, kind of automated GIS workflows that we can hand over to NCDOT, and that they'd be able to rerun in-house whenever they want to use updated data. So trying to make it as streamlined as possible so that anytime this analysis needs to be rerun, we want to generate new scores, we want to reprioritize this list, or perhaps we want to use clearance restricted bridges instead of weight restricted bridges, or we just want to lump all those structures in together. Well, we can just change the data inputs instead of just using weight restricted bridges, we can use, all of these different points on the road network where we know there's a restriction. Or maybe instead of just using businesses from all around the state, we want to focus on a single sector, manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, or impacts there, because we know we have some sort of trucking freight that's very important to that sector. Should be able to really easily change those inputs and then rerun the model. Again, taking this kind of probabilistic approach about, we don't know where the actual freight relationships are, but we know that we want these locations to be able to access the freight network without having to deal with the restricted area. That should be really easy to do in the future. So as often as that data is updated, it can be sent back through the model and scored and reprioritized in this way.
One thing I am kind of concerned about increasing it for vertical clearances throughout our state. I don't want the industry to mistake this application on giving them permission to move something that's greater than legal values according to general statutes. Obviously those type of loads require permits from our office to check the infrastructure of everything. So that would be the only disclaimer that I would need on this. If y'all were to add any other values for bridges, like including height or HS ratings for anything greater than legal max. Currently, right now, it looks like this is set for legal max, which is the current 80,000 or posting of less. And what Kendall mentioned earlier about a lot of carriers don't know until they reach the bridge that bridge is posted. Well, the carrier has an inherent responsibility to know the route of travel prior to movement. That is our view on how things are done from industry and what we expect from industry. So, they do, and even farmers and everybody else hauling grain, they have an inherent responsibility themselves to know their route and to know whether or not they can go down that route prior to loading and moving.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
One of the areas, if everybody remembers Hurricane Matthew, when the Lumberton area was hit so hard, a lot of roads. I don't know the details yet. Somebody on here probably knows how many, but a bunch of routes were blocked. So, everyone was called, even including us, in the emergency management office, attempting to route our own troopers and emergency aid to places was tough to find a route that was still open. But then we also had industry calling, saying, hey, I need to get to these areas. How can I get there? And it was it was a lot of work to figure out any road that was open to get them there, much less ones that were not blocked. Then, of course, in the western part of the state, they even got hit, so it was tough. And I think that was the most calls I've ever gotten in a short amount of time of the frustration of because they were on new routes. Typically, exactly like Ben said, that's always been our stance. It still is. Hey, it's your job to know it. But in those kind of circumstances where they're kind of in places where they normally wouldn't be, it's just not. If you kind of look at the resources that are given to them, it's not super friendly. Whereas I could see something like this being a guide that would be a lot more friendly if it was given to them, or I don't know if there ever is an intent for anyone in the public to have to be able to see this information. But I know on our side, especially in those kind of situations, if we can have an interactive program that would kind of show us the ways that someone could go or not go, would be really big, especially in emergency stuff. But I don't really know what that plan for this program would be in the future. But
when it comes to emergencies, Kendall, Joint Forces headquarters, and we've been working with them ever since Matthew. When we lost 580 something bridges in the eastern part of our state, the logistics of getting support and everything, was limited. Like you suggested, even trying to get troopers into areas, it was a moving target. One day would be cleared, the next day it wouldn't be, and then another place would open up. But Joint Forces and those individuals there, along with a lot of stuff that they implemented with Drive NC now, is real time. They've made really great headway with that. even with our office, we kind of were kept in the loop with Matthew on how we could route with the joint forces. So that could be an option also if you've ever looked into utilizing them, the EOC.
This is a great discussion. I'll just comment that, that there are, this tool specifically, we've kind of tailored it narrowly to demonstrate the research that we conducted and the methodology for that research, as well as the results, and thinking about how critical these bridges are specifically to these, to business and agriculture. But, ArcGIS web applications as a platform have all kinds of different applications. And these applications are actually able to use database on the back end and kind of push real-time updates as those changes are made to what's open, what's not open, especially in these types of emergency and crisis situations. That takes some management as well, but they're certainly suited for that kind of thing. And just to kind of continue commenting on this technology specifically, some folks asked about other web applications and other layers. Yeah, certainly you can expand these maps with just about as many layers as you'd like to show, the same types of functionality, additional custom tools that you might be interested in. And really the important thing is kind of tailoring it correctly for your audience. So, we've had some great discussion about maybe the utility of having something that's really user-friendly and public-facing, which may be a little bit different than the type of technical kind of method and research results communication that we've built this for. It's quite simple with ArcGIS web apps to do that kind of thing. And if you want to just put in a few different layers that you want, that you only want the kind of general public audience to see, or maybe you have a freight and industry audience you'd like to see, you can throw just those layers in whatever kind of functionality you'd like to be interacted with in that context as well. So yeah, they really can be highly tailored for exactly what you'd like to say and exactly what you want the functionality to be. And as I mentioned, this one right now is just kind of supporting our research in that way, and we hope it supports NCDOT as it tries to prioritize just this narrow set of structures. So yeah, great discussion. I really appreciate all that feedback. It's really nice to think about these different ways that the tech can be implemented and help with some of these issues.
Yeah, just chiming in, Greg Ferrara, the tree. We've been supporting the patrol for a while now on size and weight efforts, and just kind of feeding off of what I heard from Ben and even Kendall. Just catering to these audience needs, and maybe just making some of what you've already developed that may have been for basically just exposing the research need, what the product from the research project itself to these other very specific audience needs, public, or maybe there's a possibility that within the needs of the size and weight permitting office to kind of have a module that a child version of this could be associated with. And going back to Ben's comment earlier about data timeliness, I know that this was obviously for a research project, but we've pushed out. I think for a while there, we were actually connecting with web services for automatic feeds from the bridge maintenance unit. That is, without not having to have the need for a static data set that would be constantly sent over and updated, rather live, just like you're talking about earlier, to basically not need to update these data and just basically use those. And I don't know if this was using that or can be adjusted to use that feed at such intervals whenever they become available. So just trying to address the data timeliness question from Ben and see if that would be a useful thing for a module within the existing in development permit application that's in development right now.
We decided on a quarterly update only for the purpose of making sure that the quality of data being entered from the Wiggins inspection program was accurate. We have a few individuals that look for major variances in values. And they questioned that to make sure it wasn't a user data entry error prior to implementing it. And it's mainly for verticals, vertical clearances. That's our main concern. You know, obviously our bridges are built for weight, way more than what they're stated as. However, a vertical clearance is an absolute. So, you know, you can't really fit a square peg through a round hole, and it would show immediately. So we want to make sure those values are very clean and accurate prior to implementing in our system. But in this case, I can very well see how live data would benefit. Like I said, you guys are looking at legal max. So, I mean, you're good. From what we have seen, even these posted bridges that you have, we can send 132,000 pounds over a lot of them without even any kind of restriction once we have engineers look at it. So.
Got
I
it.
guess I guess the question for Mr. Magliola are y'all planning on making this open to the public, or is it going to be just for research for DOT and no one will see it outside of DOT?
I can comment on that. So this tool currently is public. However, you know, I don't think we have necessarily an industry-facing idea for this web application. In other words, we wouldn't necessarily push this as something that industry should be reliant on for routing or for identifying restrictions or anything like that. Like we kind of mentioned, it's kind of narrowly constructed for reviewing the research and seeing how businesses may be impacted by weight restricted bridges, rather than saying, you know, this is an absolute issue here on the road network that you know, in term for a single user. So that's the kind of context that we've built it for. I think if we wanted to do something that was, you know, public facing specifically to the trucking industry, that might look a little bit different. Might have some different functionality, some different data layers, a nice extension of kind of what this is starting to do and kind of the issues that this research is aimed at dealing with, but probably best presented in a different format that's prepared for that audience.
Yeah, my thought is if it is available to the public in some possible way, that it just probably needs to be some kind of warning statement that other types of, you know, things are not incorporated. The biggest one for me is the low traffic, you know, the light traffic roads. Like Ben said, you know, the bridges is not, it's fairly easy to find, but if I put a point, if I'm an industry person and I find this app and it's associated with DOT and then I plot a route and it says I can go that way, but then I come across a light traffic road, I would kind of have the argument or the feel that I was allowed to go that way. So to me, if it's going to be somehow possibly, I would love to see it incorporate more of this stuff, but if it's not, I would just like to personally just have that caveat on there that, hey, that this is only taken into the one consideration of a posted bridge. Nothing else, like Ben said, over height, over width, over length, light traffic roads, city ordinances, all that kind of stuff are not
Absolutely
not in this.
Yeah, I think we can easily add a additional disclaimer to that effect, kind of on the splash screen in the information section. You know, kind of a couple different places in this tool, just to make it really clear to anyone using it, kind of what this is for, what the purpose is, and what it does do and doesn't do.
Awesome. It's definitely very neat. I mean, you know, in the modern world, I just had a meeting this morning with Ben over another topic, you know, is, you know, and when I was talking to Chase the other day, I mean, it's very, very difficult. And I sit on the national board for size and weight as well with CVSA is, you know, if you buy a Garmin or whatever you use to do your navigation with, it doesn't factor all this stuff. So a trucking company can put in, and often a driver will do that. They'll be told by their company, or they'll be told by the permit office to go a certain way. And of course that driver's going to get in his truck and he's going to put in the direction and Google Maps or whatever they're using is going to give them a route, and that's the way they're going to go, and they get caught often in the wrong places, just simply because those tools don't factor all this stuff in. But if there was something very easy for them to pull up and say, hey, I should go this way, not what Apple or Siri or any of them other people tell me to do, they're more likely to do versus pulling out real static maps and attempting to find those locations. I think they would be more likely to use something like this. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Well, we are coming up against time. If there are any other questions or comments, feedback, we'd still love to hear from you. If you'd like to contact us directly, that'd be great. We can field email questions as well. Just a few closing notes here before we wrap up. Just want to thank everyone for attending today. Lost my place here. Thank you for attending today. If you have any other chat comments, go ahead and pop those in there. We will follow up with attendees by email with recording and with the links to this application, and also with a link to the video walkthrough that I mentioned. And yeah, like I said, thank you. I hope you all enjoyed the webinar. I hope this is spurring at least some thoughts about how this type of technology can be used or extended, or how this specific application can be used as well.
Chase, this has been Hennett again. I would love to demo our system that we're currently creating at some time for you guys, if you would like.
Sure, that'd be great.
Just reach out to me and schedule a time, and I'll show you how interactive and what this thing can do.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody. And we will have more webinars in 2022. And I hope you'll join us then, and we'll be reaching out with more details about those opportunities.